It gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce you to the speakers for the first session of the day. So please put your hands together for Mr. Prashant Dhawan and Ms. Seema Anand. Welcome, sir and ma'am, to RST 2021. Thank you for joining us with us today. Mr. Dhawan is a co-founder and director of Biomimicry India Network and Biomimicry India Lab and Studio. His research focuses on issues related to sustainable happiness and joy. He did his bachelor's from the Delhi School of Planning and Architecture and MS in Biomimicry from the Arizona State University, USA. Driven by the quest to find his passion, he has crowned many fields like architecture, business management, and biomimicry, which led him to be the founder of one of the leading enterprises in the domain. Our second speaker for the session, Ms. Seema Anand, is a biomimicry specialist from Biomimicry 3.8 Institute, USA, and a practicing architect in Bangalore. She is also a co-founder and director of Biomimicry India Network and Biomimicry India Lab and Studio. She also consults and teaches biomimicry in the field of design. The title for their today's talk is Biomimicry, a nature-integrated design thinking and lessons from nature for succeeding in the post-COVID world. Now I would like you to invite sir and ma'am to deliver their talks. So over to you, sir and ma'am.
Good morning.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you to IIT Madras, especially for inviting us. So before we start, I want to just say we have just 1 hour, and biomimicry involves 3.8 billion years of accumulated knowledge of nature. So we would try and cover basically the broad subjects of what is biomimicry, why now, how is it relevant, and some ideas of possible applications, especially in the post-COVID world. I'm very happy that this event is called Shunya, and I saw that Shunya is being called a restart. And we are going to see that it's a huge opportunity or a challenge, depends on where we look at things. So we will not go into very deep domain specifics of biomimicry, which I'm sure a lot of you know much more about. Biomimicry is applied everywhere, right from aerospace to mechanical to chemical. But we would limit ourselves to the broad approach and try and see what is different. Is it just a new word, the new fashion word? Earlier we said sustainability, today biomimicry, day after something else will come. Is that, or is there something deeper for all of us? I think these are the questions which we should ask, and I'm sure you will be asking. Before I start, my sense is maybe this is something which we should look deeply, we should collectively own and build on. So we'll now start, and after the talk, we'll have time for questions, and then we'll collectively explore the opportunities that biomimicry throws for us. So let's start by acknowledging the moment. I think it would be unfair to just start and assume it's business as usual. Is it business as usual? If it was business as usual, I wouldn't be on a laptop with all of us locked in our homes, many of us, for almost a year. So it's 4th April 2021. We are in the middle of a pandemic, COVID-19. It is an unprecedented pause. And thank you for calling it Shunya, because a pause means you have the ability to restart. Because if you don't pause, then how do you restart? You are already in motion. So many things have been paused. And should we go back to old ways, or it is an opportunity to restart? So let's just sit back and start with a little bit of a fun quiz. We'll start with a fun quiz, which is very simple. So this is a logo. Can anybody guess? Well, I can't see anybody, but if somebody can guess what this brand is, if maybe Anurag or somebody sees. Anybody guessed what this brand is? Has anybody? Can I get an indication?
Fevicol.
Fevicol, yes.
Fevicol, yeah.
I'm sure everybody really knows this brand, and this is an adhesive. right? Everybody knows this is an adhesive. We know it. We see it every day, and most of us have used it. Now look at this new other graphic. This is the photograph of a lizard or a gecko. Now this also has an adhesive on its foot pads, and this is an adhesive which is all around you. Often you find these lizards or geckos running upside down on the ceiling ahead in, just on top of your head. That is unsticking while in motion and carrying a load. Most of you are extremely qualified engineers. Tell me which is a better adhesive, the logo that you see on top or the adhesive which is non-toxic, which doesn't leave anything, which is on the foot of the lizards or geckos we see every day around us. Similarly, what you see on the left and right extremes is a muzzle. This is a muzzle which you find in seashores. IIT Madras is next to the sea. If you go next, you'll find on seashore, they're very slimy rocks. And these muzzles are sticking onto these rocks, and there's a huge amount of tidal pressure. In spite of that, they keep on sticking, and these are not produced using any chemical processes or toxic chemicals, yet they adhere. So this is waterproof adhesives. Not only waterproof, but also taking care of cyclical force which is trying to pull them apart. So now tell me which is a better adhesive, these or that logo? I think a lot of you might know it, but in my heart of heart and my experience, I've realized a lot of us have stopped noticing the technology which is around us. It's a pause. Let's evaluate our own way of looking at things. Okay, now let's another quiz. What is this? Let's see who can guess. YouTube, most of you are watching on YouTube. If I get an indication somebody's found it, please let me know. What brand is this?
Asian Paints.
Asian Paints.
Asian Paints. Okay, paint company. We all know our paint companies, And interestingly, the earlier company and this company are not more than 50 years old. But the technology of the lizard and all is probably a million-year old. We might not know it. So let's see how much attention we are paying to technology and the knowledge around us. Now let us see. Now these paints that we know so well, we know that we have a problem that these fade over time. There are rain, dust, ultraviolet radiation, they fade. But all of us have seen birds. These are peacock feathers, our national bird. Please tell me, have you seen faded peacock feathers? Now, peacocks don't have the luxury to protect themselves from rain, ultraviolet radiation, and all dust. And often these feathers are passed from generation to generation. They don't seem to be fading. So now tell me which is a better color technology. This one or the one which has been dancing all around us, but we've stopped noticing. Similarly, on top is the lotus leaf, a sacred plant in India. Why is it sacred? Because we say that the lotus leaf never gets dirty. In spite of growing in a dirty water, it doesn't get dirty. And that's because of the microstructure of its surface. And yet, we have only now we've started hearing about paints which will not get dirty. So I wanted to start with this to use this pause to calm down our cleverness and just see things, see ourselves for what the way we are learning, the way we are existing. My humble submission is we might be becoming so economy present that we might be becoming place blind. We might be becoming nature blind. There is so much around us, but we are so caught up in the urgency of day-to-day competition with each other. There is an intellectual race going on. Who gets how many citations? Who gets this? So are we missing out? Are we missing out on the beauty and the technologies all around us? And let's put our hand on our heart. I'm sure I give you this slide. Within 10 seconds, most of you 99 will know everything about all these not more than 50-year-old technologies. But if I give you this question, then now can you identify 10 functional technologies which are better than human solution in the plants and animals that you see every day? I bet at least 99% would take an hour, or maybe we'll go to Google and search. And these things have been around for often billions of years. I want to start with that because this is a moment, at least things are in a pause. And also, let's just realize, what is this pause about? Could you even think about such a possibility? What has paused? What has paused is some of the economic activities, some of the social activities. And why? Because we couldn't pause life. Can you pause life? Try. Please try. We cannot pause life. Why I say this in such a dramatic way? Because often we forget. We forget the purpose for which we created institutions like engineering, medical, business, politics. And we forget so much that these institutions take a life of their own. Only when such a moment when we realize that we can pause these institutions is a good time, as you said, Shunya, to look at things. That so let's look. This is what seems to be happening. In our pre-COVID world, we were busy like a caterpillar, consuming in a race. And quite honestly, I think we had started looking at nature as a raw material. I don't know what you have experienced, but in most of my engagements, I find that people were looking at nature and thinking, how do I shape the environment so that it fits in and nourishes the economy? So much so, it is my observation, and just check if it's true in your thing. I find that we have also started looking at society and our own fellow human beings as raw material. We are thinking, how do I shape human beings to fit into the economy and nourish the economy? Isn't it so? Even our own children, we are trying to shape them so that they fit into the economy. It's a good moment. Shunya is a good moment. This pause is a good moment. We have paused the economy. So what does it tell us? What it tells us is, what is the economy? Economy is a tool. It's a servant that we created to serve us. And if your servant has become your master, and we have, in our hurry, we have lost that memory, then I don't think we'll get real answers to real solution, because we are using the wrong framework. We are beginning to assume something that we have created, which is only available in our imagination. Try and explain economy to a dog or a plant. We'll realize, and if right now a tiger comes into your room, believe me, you will forget about the economy. You will be very clear that it's all about biology. In fact, a lot of us have this moment when you have an accident, or you suddenly become very lucid and you realize, and then we lose out. The next phone call comes, you have an exam or you have a target. So a pause sometimes is good. And so Shunya, let's use this Shunya to calm ourselves down and see things. So my view of this moment, of this pause, is that it's a time to reflect, and as you said, maybe restart or reset. So we see how quickly we paused our economic and social systems, because you can't pause life. Because everything that we created is in service of life, and life with a capital L, all life, not just human life. Because most of you are scientists, you realize everything is interconnected, interlinked. You can't look at things in isolation. So the right model, right in the beginning, we have to begin by getting the framework right. What is the framework? The economy is our tool, our servant, which should be designed to be in service of society. And society is but a small subset, a small subsystem in the larger ecology. And the society should be so designed so that it's in alignment with ecology. That's it, no rocket science. So unless we get our model right, we can be busy looking busy. And I'm sure a lot of you know what I mean. Most of us are now busy looking busy. We don't want to look that we are But is there meaning in such kind of work where the frameworks are wrong? So I want to use this session more to provoke the larger questions. Let's use the shunya. That we need to now, we have the opportunity to look at purpose. So we had designed the economy that it was no longer possible for us to pay attention. And we realize what happens. So how do we create a framework where without doing extra effort, we are always mindful of the implications on ecological systems, and that's where biomimicry comes in. So interestingly, while all these things are happening, I would also think our generation, especially yours and the young people in IITs and other, this is also a great moment. While we are in a pandemic, we also are at the threshold of unprecedented capabilities. You've got quantum computing, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, additive manufacturing. The kind of capabilities nobody ever had, I think, in earlier generations. But while you have these capabilities, you also have huge problems like pandemics, climate change, biodiversity depletion, environmental depletion, poverty, waste. And I would challenge you to say that even unemployment is a waste. Let's use this calmness to see outside of the industrial human being. Have you ever seen an unemployed species outside of humanity? Think about it. So is it a design fault? Or is it something you just live with and be busy solving something which in any case it's your invention? So my claim is humanity, the industrial human being has invented unemployment. It is not a natural condition. It's a system error. And if we get our designs right, we can solve these problems. I'm going to challenge you today. So, and also waste. If you go to a million-year-old forest, do you ever see waste? We don't see waste. Waste is again a human invention. In fact, my sense is that if aliens are looking for humans, they must have told, look for a plastic bag. That's one indicator that a human has been there. So we are not doing too well. Let's have the humility to understand we are not doing too well. And there is a lot we can learn from nature. And that's very important because at one point you have these great capabilities, and at another point you have these big problems. So what do we want to do with these capabilities? One thing is we will make our people give them a 3 crore salary so that they can make the next smartphone. Or we will say we'll use these capabilities, put our best people so that they can solve these problems. It's a choice, but a choice will only work if our framework is right, that economy and society should be in alignment with ecology. So once we agree that we might have the resources, the ability to change, what we need is the right imagination. And I am again going to make a big challenge. I don't think we have a problem of resources. We have a problem of imagination. If we get our imagination right, we already live in a sustainable world. We have so many design flaws, and we are going to explore that during this short section. So Gandhi once said, speed is irrelevant if you're going in the wrong direction. So as a scientist said that all of us are in a big bus which is going at a top speed and it is going to head in a ditch. But out of habit, we are fighting for the window seat. Okay, you got the window seat, what's the fun? So I think it's time for us to see this is a slowdown. Should we look at the direction where we are headed? So we need to revisit common purpose. We've realized that we can't just be human-centered, we can't be just economy-centered, and we can't be just technology-centered. We need to be life-centered. Life with a capital L, all life. And if we agree on that, then comes the smart question, how? Is there a framework? So let's just start looking at nature once ago. So the good thing is, if you start looking outside, you'll realize we are not the first one to use sanitizers. Right now, everybody's using sanitizers and doing social distancing. But wood ants, there are ants which have been using tree resins as a sanitizer or anti-pathogenic agent to line their nest, to line their bodies for millions of years. So again, we are not the smartest species. This has been happening. We've just not noticed it. We think we've invented it. Similarly, We are not the first to practice social distances. There is a dampwood termite, and there are, temnothorax ants. Once they get infected, they keep a distance from the colony. Some of them will be so altruistic they'll leave the colony. The other will indicate that stay away from me. So again, we are not the first ones. This has been happening in nature for so long. Similarly, there is a species of ants, Lasius neglectus. They get infected by these fungal spores, and instead of taking away the individual, they actually clean up the infected individual, but in turn, they also get a low level of infection in the entire community. So, in many ways, they acquire, or you could say, a low level of vaccination is happening, or herd immunity is happening. So there we go again. So we are not the first ones to think of these things. They have been happening in nature. So we are nature. We are not outside of nature. And coming closer to our industrial way of life, what you see here are accidents, right? And I can almost promise you, I can bet with you that wherever you are, within 100-kilometer radius of wherever you might be, in the last 4 or 5 hours, some intelligent Homo sapien must have had an accident with another Homo sapien. I can almost guarantee that. Whether it's a cycle running into a cart or a car brushing against a car. And we have technology, we have red lights, we have rules, we have police, so many things. But let's look at this other graphic. You see these birds, these locusts, these fish, which we see every day. Please tell me, do you read reports today 15 birds had an accident, or today 40? Have we ever seen? And they don't apparently have the kind of technology and rules that we smart human beings have. But are the rules of physics, chemistry, maths, engineering different in these two technologies? Clearly, we understand that the rules are the same. It's just that we have not paid attention. We have not paid attention, and we've created such a divide between nature and engineering and nature that often, although a lot of you now must be reading about swarm intelligence and so many of these rules, but for a long time, we've not been paying attention. And I assure you, in our current practices and education system, a lot of these things are still not paid attention to. Similarly, we are talking big about carbon sequestration as if it's a new idea, as if we've come up with something. Now, if you look at our coral reefs, our soils, our trees, they've been sequestering carbon for billions of years. We are simply mimicking what nature was already doing, but we've given it a fancy word. Again, this is the arrogance of humanity. We just need to connect to nature and see how nature works. And it's been happening for billions of years. We give it big names. We give it restoration. But I ask, restore what? Eventually restore what? And for that, you have to restore what the way nature works. And to do that, you have to mimic nature. Similarly, ants, I'm sure wherever you are within maybe 200, 400 meters, ants are busy doing what they are doing. And sometimes hundreds and thousands of doing them in a team. Now let's keep our hand on our heart. How many of us have worked in a team? If I put 10 of you, 10 of us together, how simple it is. We all know how difficult it is to work in a team, to take a decision, to align everybody's behavior. Yet, how do these ants work so successfully in a team? After all, they are taking decisions, tasks are getting accomplished. We might say that we don't understand it, but to say it's not happening is non-scientific. And to understand what are the design principles of decision making, that suddenly unlocks. And it's not that it's not being used today, especially in the Internet of Things and in algorithms. A lot of these algorithms are coming from ants. But there is still, a lot of us don't even understand that the algorithms we are using actually came from understanding how ants take collective decisions. But the most interesting thing about ants is, as against our organizations, where nothing happens if you don't have a boss or you don't have a supervisor, ants don't have a hierarchy. They are self-organized. Wouldn't it be wonderful for us to have self-organized systems? But where do we look? maybe we can learn something from the ants. It might not be an exact copy, but at least we should know how come without a leader they are such a successful species. Similarly, let's look at this. We have these urban breakdowns, our roads break, and we all know what happens when the road breaks. We are cursing, nothing is happening. Then we do dharnas, morchas, we write to newspapers, then the government takes out 3 tenders. By the time roads are even more broken, but we've all seen termite mounds. They are also like common infrastructures, millions of termites living together. It is common property. Now, don't break a termite mound, but if you find that a termite mound has been broken and you come visit it in 2-3 days, you'll find it's been repaired. Might not be the same shape, but it's been repaired. See, design-wise, the problem is the same. There is a multi-agent system. Something is broken. Now, every agent is feeling, is it my job? Do I take a requisition? Do I need a sanction? Whom do I get an approval from? Who will work? But how do they do it? Why can't we do it? We should at least have the curiosity. Now, of course, now we know they have a decentralized and distributed decision-making system. They have decentralized and distributed know-how. But once we know it, we say, oh, now we can solve it. But mostly we don't even know. And the important thing is that we've stopped noticing. We've stopped asking these questions. So I just want us to take this pause and try and become earthlings. We are very good economic entities, but are we good planetary entities? Let's look at our planet. Our planet is actually 4.5 billion years old. And life has been around for 3.8 billion years. And all these living systems, humanity is here only for 200,000 years. And it's a disclaimer, I am talking of what science currently tells us. If it changes tomorrow, well, then that will be that truth. So in India, I would say, my friends, our elders, and we respect our elders have been around for 3.8 billion years, from cyanobacteria to mushrooms to. So let's really acknowledge our true elders. And we have only come on earth for 200,000 years ago. And out of that, only in the last 200 years did the Industrial Revolution happen. And most of our curriculum, even the institutions that we have created, whether it's engineering, medical, were created in many ways to support the industrial way of life. So they are not like gravity that they can't be changed. Maybe they need to change, they need to evolve. So often what we create as a servant becomes our master. And I want this little pause to give us the ability to think that, no, we have created it, we can change it if our requirements have changed. So let's begin with the deep humility that maybe nature has already solved many of the problems we are grappling with today. It's just that we haven't created a structured system of going and looking at nature and bringing these solutions to us. And the good thing is nature has been doing it for 3.8 billion years. And in 3.8 billion years, 99.9% of the species have gone extinct, which means the beta testing is so rigorous that whatever survives today has a very high degree of being sustainable. While we have whatever we do, there is a very high risk of unintended consequences, because whatever we do, we have been on Earth only for 200,000 years, and our industrial revolution is only 200 years. So maybe we'll do something and we don't know, maybe 100 years down the line, 1,000 years, it might have implications. So it is very important to have the humility to say, let's look at how nature does it. And the great part is, nature has been very generous. Outside of the industrial human being, no other species on Earth has taken intellectual property rights and blocked its information from anyone. So this, my friends, is the biggest Creative Commons. Again, we were not the first ones to come up with Creative Commons. Nature is the biggest Creative Commons. So this is giving us an opportunity to look at strategies for free. And there is only one design brief if we look at nature, and that design brief is create conditions conducive to life. The important thing is life means all life, not just human life. And now let's go into the structured part of biomimicry, and Seema will take us through how biomimicry has been structured.
So if you're new to the subject, you might say, okay, that is very inspiring. I completely agree with you. But tell me exactly what is biomimicry and how is it practiced? Is it even possible to use this idea to create some real life products and real life solutions? So the second part of a presentation is exactly about that. And we're going to show you some case studies where this has been successfully done. But to start with, what is biomimicry? How is it formally defined? So this is a definition by our institute where we've studied biomimicry. It defines it as conscious emulation of nature's genius. Conscious implying that it is not left to chance or an interest of a few. It's very intentional now. There are tools and methods where anybody who's interested in the subject can actually learn it and use it to solve a human challenge. Emulation is not a slavish copy, but it is really learning the deep pattern and a deep understanding of nature and then engineering it to solve our challenge. And nature's genius, as you've already seen, is because nature's been around much longer than us. Many organisms have mastered how to survive sustainably on the planet without really causing any damage. And what can we learn from their solutions? So biomimicry is practiced at 3 levels. It's called form, process, and system. Form is really anything that you can see, measure, whether it's a shape or a texture, even at a nanoscale, because you can put a dimension on it. And in nature, everything has a certain shape or a texture to solve some kind of a function. So it can be a very powerful tool to solve many of our challenges. But there are other 2 levels. One of them is the process, that how are things made in nature? So what is the manufacturing happening and how does it happen in nature and what can we learn from it? And the third and the most important level is systems, because just like in a human world, in the natural world, everything is interconnected and interdependent. So the planet functions like one entity. And whatever we design, we also have to understand how will it behave in a larger system. So what can nature teach us at a systems level? So true biomimicry is really realized when you practice all 3, not just copy your form, but how is it made and how does it fit into a larger system? And for today's talk, where we have filtered out 4 important questions which might be relevant to an engineering background. These are what can nature teach us about sustainable procurement of materials and services? Anything that you want to make in our world, you need material and services. And so does nature. I mean, we are more than 7 billion people on the planet, 30 million species. Everything is made out of some kind of a material. There is a lot of service industry in nature, whether it's pollination, etc. So nature has a lot of lessons to offer. How does it do it? Or sustainable design, sustainable manufacturing. And once you've made a product, about how do you maintain things and what happens to these products at the end of their life? Does it become like a linear system, which is wasteful, which is what we've been practicing by far? But in nature, everything works in a closed loop. And how does it happen? So we are going to just take each of these questions, and for each question, we are going to show you the deep patterns, how nature solves this functional problem. And normally, what are we used to? Our industrial way of thinking, how do we approach these problem solving? So let's take our first question on what can we learn from living systems about procurement of resources, whether it is energy or material. So nature really values what is abundant. So nature by far runs on solar. We value what is scarce. So our entire world depends on the fossil fuel. Nature uses what is local, only what is local. So organisms, whether it's trees, plants, insects, they don't have the luxury to mine something in Africa, assemble it in another part of the world and transport it to everywhere else. They have to work with the resources, what is immediately available, and meet all their functional needs. And nature uses a very small subset of elements. We tend to use a very large subset of elements. So this really implies about, the various elements you study in a periodic table. We have more than 100 elements, and in our world, we use all of them. And this is the fundamental difference between nature's chemistry and ours, that nature uses very selectively about 28 materials, and how everything is built with just these material. And that's how it's very easy to keep things in a closed loop. It's very easy to upcycle material, even move it from organism to organism and ecosystem to ecosystem.
Yeah, just to tell you that the cell phone has many more elements and materials in its making than these two human beings that are talking to you and your own body. So you can imagine how primitive our engineering is, that we need to have 100 elements or in a small cell phone, and while our own body is primarily 28 materials, actually 4, the rest are traces. And why is it important? I just wanted to link it to our initial question, that today we have these technologies and we have these problems. So where are the opportunities? So maybe now we have the opportunities when we can start replacing some of these materials, because we are able to work at nanoscale, at a molecular manufacturing. We are able to have the computational abilities. The only thing is we need to have the right imagination. So we are saying that let nature provoke our imagination.
So this is a biomimicry example on how the conventional Portland cement can be replaced by a greener, a carbon negative cement, and how engineers have successfully done is by just copying the recipe of how corals are made in seawater. And how they are made is it's a biomineralization process of calcium carbonate in seawater, which is abundant. So calcium and carbon ions are abundant in seawater. So what they've taken is taken this recipe. They are actually taking smoke coming out of cement factories and passing it through brine, and by just the change of pH, they are able to get a material, not as simple as it sounds, but a material which has the same strength as Portland cement, but actually it is sequestering carbon. So in Portland cement, for 1 ton of cement, you would emit a ton of carbon dioxide. Here, for a ton of cement, you would sequester half a ton of carbon dioxide. So it's carbon negative. So what can we learn from living systems about design of products, processes, and systems? So in design, nature's approach is really invest more in shape and information.
Yeah, I just want to
not in material.
Link it to the earlier question. So now we said that nature doesn't have a choice. It is limited with the very few elements. Now and the same thing an engineer will say, that how do I do all these things? You're saying you can't have so many. Now, how does nature solve it? Nature uses shape and information at a molecular level to achieve multiple functionalities. So that's how it is linked to the earlier question, that how do you do these things given the new constraint?
So you can take the example of a skin. It's the same cell, but by just the change of density, how the same skin behaves on our skull, on our head to our toes and everything in between, how it has different properties, different functions with just the same type of cell.
Yeah,
by change of density.
Yeah, in fact, IIT is already doing so much work on sandwich structures, on density gradients. If you really see at a fundamental level, it is shape and information. And this vocabulary can say, now I restrict the canvas of the materials, but I get multiple functionalities.
So nature designs everything for multifunctionality. So again, if we go back to our skin, it is actually a protective a layer between outside and inside. It protects our internal organs. It is our biggest touch organ. And it also thermally regulates us. So by sweating or shivering, we control the body temperature depending on the environment that we are in. So it has many functions built into a same solution. Whereas most of the products we design are, by far, what we've designed are monofunctional. And how we can change this mindset, that how everything we design can have more than one function. So nature uses optimal utilization of any kind of resource, whereas we are maximized towards one function.
Yeah, to understand that, why is it doing that? Because in nature, investment of material is very, very high. Material or resource is very expensive. I don't want to use the word cheap, but information and design is cheap. You can keep on increasing complexity. In fact, the word information has form inside. So the complexity of form is how information is encoded. And that way, you will find that in nature, very rarely an investment goes idle. So for example, our designs are so that something is doing very well along one use, but it's lying idle for most of the time. Now let's look at this little design difference, and just by imagining a new way of living, we can see we can unlock so many of the resources. So in nature, there's hardly anything which is ever idle where there is an investment of energy and resources. Even a territory where a lion is, while the lion is there, many other creatures are doing their own thing. And when the lion goes, somebody else comes. But let's look at the way we have designed our world. Anything which humans have designed to a great extent is resources, energy lying idle. Let's look at vehicles. Most of the vehicles we own is so much technology. It's lying parked 95% of the time. In fact, the most expensive vehicles, the Lamborghinis, they are probably lying parked 99% of the time. If an alien was to come, he would laugh at us. What a dumb species.
I mean, in the lockdown, the migrants, thousands of migrants are walking and our cars are like locked up.
Yeah.
It's a resource which we will not allow anybody to use.
Yeah, we are victims of our own imagination. Nature didn't say that this is the only way. Nature said gravity cannot be changed, but this can be changed. So similarly, extend this logic to everything that we have designed. The table you are sitting on, probably 90% of the time it's lying doing nothing. The houses that we are living in. Now, I am not saying that there is something wrong, but we want to challenge our imagination. And is it too exotic? Observe what is happening. Without consciously realizing, we've started shifting toward increasing resource utilization by improving our design. What is happening? First came the carpooling. Then they came businesses like Ola, Uber. They don't own a single car. They are simply decreasing the utilization. Now you are hearing of co-living, co-working.
Airbnb.
Now, instead of an accidental resonance with natural ways, what if we do this more consciously? Then we can accelerate, we can actually create abundance while decreasing resources and energy. It's a problem of imagination, not a problem of resources. So this is a very powerful principle, and I think engineers should be thinking that how can they increase? In fact, we've been challenging vehicle designers to see, can this vehicle do something else in 95% of the time that it's not doing anything? Now imagine the cell phone. It used to be a pager one day. Today it's become so important because the same investment in molecules is doing so many more functions. That's the kind of evolution nature does. And I think that's the opportunity for us.
Okay, a simple example of how biomimicry is used to design our products. This is a concept car by Mercedes inspired by a boxfish. So this form was used to design a more efficient car body, but they wanted to go a step further to reduce the material consumption to make this car. And they approached a tree biologist who's been studying tree structures for over 15, 20 years in Germany. And he's taken those algorithms on how tree branching happens and put it in a software. And now you can run any product in it, and it has a function of soft kill, where it removes the material where there is no load and makes things really lightweight. So they were able to make this car in 1/3 the material, and hence increasing the fuel efficiency even more. So what can we learn from living systems about manufacturing and construction? So once you have procured material, you have a design, you also need to make things. So nature uses additive manufacturing. We've been used to a lot of subtractive manufacturing where we mine, cut, chop, end up with a lot of waste. But if you look at trees, plants, even our own bodies, the way the bones grow, cells and tissues are put one by one, they are added where it's needed, same as trees and other organisms. There is no waste. Material is not put in places where it's not needed. So a lot of all manufacturing in nature is self-assembled, where it's not made in any factory. There is no smokestack inside an ocean, or there is no assembly line, there is no transportation. Everything is made in body at ambient temperature, using no toxic chemicals, because everything is made in body. So it cannot afford to harm living organisms. And as a result, there is no pollution. There are no long-term toxins left in sea, in soil. Yeah, and we normally tend to think nature is, very made of soft materials, soft tissues. But if you look at materials like shells, which are really hard, or our bones or teeth, they are hard materials. And they are self-assembled, again, using very low energy processes. I mean, a shell is made with a protein layer which attracts through its charges calcium and carbonate ions to settle on a protein layer. And by combining a soft and a hard layer, by layering it, it ends up making a very hard ceramics. Or you take spider silk, which if you take the thread of a spider silk, it's considered tougher than even Kevlar. So in tensile strength, it is very strong. And it is made by just eating some flies and some mosquitoes. It's really not made in factories using heat, beat, and treat, as we call it. So this is an interesting example. Maybe some of you have seen it. Let me play this video where you see a yellow blob in the middle. There are a lot of white spots around the center. And you'll see this yellow material expanding all around, first in a uniform manner, and then forming a kind of a network. So it's contracting from places where there is, on some places, and forming like a network. So this is a time-lapse video taken over 26 hours. And this experiment was done by a Japanese engineer. And this yellow blob is nothing but a living organism. It's a single cell organism called slime mold. So in the natural living world, these slime molds, who are just single cell, no neurons, but they have a lot of multinuclei, they attract other slime molds. They come together and behave like a single organism, like a superorganism. And that's how they look out for food. So they spread themselves uniformly all around. If they find food, they will form this network and a nutrient distribution channels, which are considered one of the most efficient way to distribute food. And what this Japanese engineer did was he took a map of Japan. He put the center where he put these slime molds was actually Tokyo. And these white dots were oats, which he put in the neighboring cities. And he left these slime molds and he took a video. And what he found, after 26 hours, they had formed a network where they located all these oats. So in a way, different cities, and formed a network system which is very close to the railway network of Japan, which is considered one of the most efficient railway network, formed over hundreds of engineers using some very intelligent engineers. And these simple single cell slime molds did it in 26 hours.
Yeah, so this is a brainless single cell solving a route optimization problem.
So now these are considered biological computers. Algorithms have been derived on them, that how do they form these efficient networks, and can we use this intelligence to distribute any of our resources, which could be water, which could be server distribution, or even transport systems. So what can we learn from living systems about maintaining functional health and managing waste? So as I said, once you've made something, you also have to maintain it. You also have to think about what will happen to this product at the end of its life. So nature uses ideas like, or strategies like self-clean, self-heal. And of course, there's no such thing as waste. A byproduct of one organism is actually nutrient for somebody else. Whereas we use everything that we make has to be externally cleaned. It has to be externally repaired. There's no concept of self-repair. And of course, there is a lot of waste we've generated over many centuries, which is lying in our marine waters, which is lying in our soil. So how can we change this? So if you very famous example from lotus, how lotus leaf keep itself clean. It's really because of its nanoscale microscopic structure, which is so bumpy, so rough, that it doesn't allow water and dirt to settle on it. And many textiles and paint companies have been inspired to use this to keep surfaces clean. And another type of clean is keeping clean from bacteria. This is a Galapagos shark skin, which has a design. Again, there is shape and information, not a new material, which doesn't allow bacteria to find a foothold on the surface. So there is no strategy of killing the bacteria like we do with disinfectants and antibiotics, where in turn we create a stronger and stronger bacteria. Here, bacteria is just not allowed to settle on a surface. So this texture has been mimicked by a company called Sharklet to make coatings, to make films, thin films, which can be stuck on handrails, doorknobs, even medical devices, so that there is no bacteria and people are not falling ill, picking up bacteria as they touch things.
Yeah, what an opportunity post-COVID.
And about managing waste, if you see, this is a simple soil web. And how this really behaves is that every time, let's say a tree branch falls on the ground, you will find in a few days some worms or fungi growing on it. These fungi might be eaten by some arthropods, the arthropods might be eaten by some birds, and one day the bird will die, become part of the soil again, and nourish some other plant. So material is moving from a plant branch to a fungi's body, from a fungi body to a bird body one day, and back to the soil, because they are all made out of the same material. So material is moving in a closed loop. An eco-industrial park was, this is in Kuala Lumpur, which uses similar idea that there is a coal-fired power plant in the heart of this eco-industrial park. It has many byproducts like clinker, gypsum, and conventionally these are all considered waste because nobody knows what to do with them. But here they have placed geographically next companies which can use these byproducts effectively next door. So a pharmaceutical company which will use the excess tea, a road making company which will use the clinker, and creating these closed loops so that there is no such thing as a waste which has to be thrown away. And on the left, you see an image of a carpet. So this is a carpet company called Interflow, which has been using biomimicry for over a decade now to transform the way they do business. And they've used nature's inspiration to not only redesign their carpet, how they look, but how they are made. And they are actually employing fishermen who are out of jobs in Indonesia to pull out all the fish nets which were thrown in marine water, to pick them up, clean up our sea, and supply it to them as a raw material. So they are mining out of waste and not new virgin material to make their carpets. So another idea that is people have to start thinking about that, how can we mine out of waste? So if we do simple things like, not very simple, but we procure material, design, manufacture, maintain, and have an end, manage the end of functional life of a product as nature does, there is a chance we can create a world of abundance, sustainability as we desire, and yet meet all our needs.
And this is a huge opportunity or a huge lost chance for India. Because in some ways, when all the world, the developed world has developed and they've run out of land, only now we are undertaking smart cities and make in India. So do we want to become a Europe of 20 years ago? Or here we have an opportunity to do things with hindsight and understanding what does our place, our resources require. So this is a challenge. I think we will not lose this moment. But I think all of you must be saying, this is all theory. Is it working? So the good news is that we've been teaching biomimicry for the last now nearly 7-8 years. And this is the only program to our knowledge which has been successfully taught across disciplines. While we are all saying we need multidisciplinary subjects, this is a demonstration. So we have taught in more than 150 workshops, and this includes, these are the kind of places we have taught. So right from a fashion designer to a politician to a BCom student to a space engineer
To children
to
in
children,
schools. Yeah.
it is because nature, I'm sorry to say, but nature gives a damn about engineering, physics, politics. Those are our imaginations. Nature is about pattern and phenomena. Everything is embedded. And that's the kind of integrated thinking that now in today's world will really lead to true innovation. Uh, I I don't want to sound that, but I have met a lot of research scholars, and they say that within a disciplinary domain there is a lot of research fatigue. It's very difficult. So you have to learn how to do multidisciplinary research. But the question is, what is the working format? This is already demonstrated. And we want to just share with you a few student projects. And our workshops are very small, so we don't have the depth to fully do that. But the results have been phenomenal. So this was one project by a student. It was just a 2-week workshop where they developed a filtration system inspired by the kidney of a kangaroo rat. The kangaroo rat is one of creature which doesn't drink water during its lifetime. It gets all its water needs from its food. But for that very reason, any water that goes out of the system is a very expensive resource. So its kidney needs to be super efficient so that whatever is excreted has minimum water molecules. So understanding the mechanism of the kidney, this student
But
designed.
interestingly, this team, there is one biologist and 4 engineers working together. The biologists hated engineering and the engineers hated biology. And yet they ended up with a product which is, I think they almost got a funding for it. So
Yeah.
it is
So
possible to do
yeah,
multidisciplinary.
so we have to be very realistic that often it takes 5, 10, or even 1 month just to get the team dynamics going. Collaboration is the next step. This was a project at NID students where they designed gunny bags which are thrown, during disaster relief, and often things get broken, and cell phone covers inspired by how a cat falls. And cats generally land softly without breaking. Simple things, but these ideas wouldn't have happened without looking at nature. This is another very interesting project where a team came to us. They wanted to make biodegradable chip packaging. And when they looked at nature, they realized that our packaging is so dumb. Most of our packaging has an expiry date. And even though the food inside is good, just because of the date, 20% of our food is getting unnecessarily wasted. But if you look at nature, a banana doesn't lie. When it goes rotten, the color changes. So they realize, can we make our packaging real time, sense and respond? And suddenly this gave a complete new possibility to designing of packaging. Similarly,
So I think this is also very interesting in biomimicry that you start with a functional problem, but the discoveries you made make you do things that you never thought of. So just by mere observation, a lot of insights happen, which I think is a very different from a usual scientific way of solving problems.
yeah, and the great thing is it's completely scientific, because if somebody says, "Oh, this is out of the world," you say, "No, no, this is part of our world, and the evidence is in the banana, or the evidence is in the." So the only thing is we don't know it. So go talk to a biologist. That's all that is required. Similarly, even social problems, we have people who've come up with design strategies for team management. So this was a group in NID who looked at teamwork. These dogs in Africa are one of the most successful hunters, almost 80 to 85%. So how come they are so successful? And they were especially looking that in a team, often you don't do what was expected to do, so other people will sulk. Now in dogs, you can't sulk in a hunt. If you sulk, you die. So how does the system readjust to these unexpected behaviors? A lot of these questions which we don't even think about, and then they suddenly lead to discovery of design principles which can make more resilient system. So we've also had amazing things where actually our students taught us, and that's the most satisfying thing when you learn from your own student. And when a group of students wanted to look at gender equality, and we said this is too difficult, and they actually looked at slime mold and other things, neural networks, mycelium,
Yeah.
and came up with strategies. And we stood humble, but our respect for nature grew. That we are not the experts, nature is the expert. And these are just few things we want to show it to you, so that, because you should have a healthy doubt that, okay, it's nice to speak, but anything happening, we are overwhelmed by the possibilities of solutions that happen. But before we end, actually the most important thing we want to talk about, and which is often missed in our society, in our culture right now, is that biomimicry is more than just emulation. Whatever we talked about till now was emulation, which was giving you a technical solution which later on would have an economic outcome. Because that's, remember the earlier framework, that's the way we have designed our society. And that's the reason for its dysfunctionality. So in biomimicry, actually, our humble thing is that we have made a circle because, in fact, it's not our circle, our institute made it. But what it means is that you have to do three things together in equal importance. So these are ethos, emulate, and reconnect. Emulate, we've spoken about, which is copying from nature, the technical, the intellectual, the economic outcomes. Ethos is the ethic, create conditions conducive to life. It should be as important. And the third, which is least paid attention to, is reconnect. Reconnect is our emotional love and connection with nature, outside of all intellectual and economic jargon. Because if you don't love something, you're only pretending. You're only intellectually saying that I want to do it. So if we do all three, then true biomimicry happens. And then we have a more balanced system. I would say we will have more balanced professionals, we will have more balanced society, because we as beings have created a culture which is too focused on only one dimension. But there is a dimension to the purpose, to alignment. And to do that, we will probably have to look at our current ways of education and research. Biomimicry in application is actually tough because it involves multidisciplinary exploration. So we have to see how do we create the space where multidisciplinary professionals can work, and even putting multidisciplinary professionals together and locking them in a room might not work. So we actually feel that a little bit of training in system integration skills and system thinking prepares people to start learning in multidisciplinary team. And the big shift is that from human-centered, we become life-centered. And so let's get back to the COVID pause, the shunya. So we are in a pause. Let's think metaphorically, we have become a pupa. Given our tendencies, we can very well go back to becoming fatter caterpillars. Or we can change, we can restart and become restorative. Biomimicry gives us a chance to rise. And you don't have to trust us. Don't take our word. Now let's go back and look at what everybody has been saying, right from our spiritual leaders to scientific leaders. If you really go back, they've all been asking us to look at nature. Till 10 years ago, I didn't know what it meant. Biomimicry gave me a way to understand what they mean. I would welcome you to join this journey. Discover it on your own. And for every talk, there has to be one big takeaway. My request, our request to you is, if nothing, just develop a new habit of the mind. We have a habit of brushing our teeth. And that's a simple habit. For every big problem that you're solving, at least have a question, what would nature do here? You might not have the answer, and that's okay. But not having the right question, that's not okay. So let's get this question in our vocabulary of solution finding, and answers will happen. So we end this by humbly thanking all our teachers, and our teachers include from cyanobacteria to fellow Homo sapiens. So I think we've taken a little more time, but if there are any questions, we'll be happy to take them.
Thank you so much, sir, for that great session. I'm sure people have gotten deep insight of what really biomimicry is, and they'll be imbibing those principles of biomimicry in their day-to-day life. So now with this, we'll open up with a short Q&A session. So Arnab, do you have any questions?
Hello. Thank you, sir and ma'am, for that insightful session. We got to learn many things, and I actually hoped it went on for some more time with some more examples, some more implications. Yeah, we have got.
In fact, before every talk, we struggle to pull out some. I mean, we want to show so many, but you guys give us only 1 hour, so we have to decide. We cannot show this. We cannot show this. It's very tough.
We have a 2-week credit course in the open electives at NID. So
Thank you, sir, for that information. Sir, we have got a few questions from YouTube, from the audience. So Johan Kukreja, he asked that biomimicry is a very important principle, but where should we start? I mean, the nature is massive. There are things going on at micro to macro levels. Where should we start? Yeah, that's what Johan has asked.
Yeah, Johan, it's a very important question. So that's the reason where a structured subject of biomimicry was created. And of course, in this 1 hour talk, we couldn't take you through the methodology, structure, and tools. So to simplify and make biomimicry applicable, two set of parameters have been created. Like, we all know in our industrial way of life, if you can't measure something, it's very difficult to manage it. So certain metrics which are called Life's principles, and although there are various institutes with various ideas, where we have studied, these are 26 measurable Life's principles, which give you the essence of the design principles which nearly all life on the planet follows. So it's a good metric to see if there are gaps in your innovation, in your process or your system. So you can do a quick gap analysis. So even if you're not able to close the gap, you understand that this is possible. And then there are deep principles which are context based. So something which is relevant in Antarctica might not be relevant in Sahara, but life principles are relevant across the board. So these are two tools or theoretical frameworks which exist, which can be taught and which should be taught, in my view, which are available. Also, there is a methodology. Just like in design thinking, you have a methodology that how do you identify that out of the 30 million species, which are the few species which are relevant to your problem, which we call, integrating biology into design. How do you integrate it? How do you extract the design principles? So these can be taught, and we are hoping slowly this will become part of our education and practice cultures.
But to answer your question another way, today this is a subject which needs to be learned, somehow. It is not easy to look at nature and solve problems. You need some tools and methods to get started, and you do need a bit of training and practice. Only then you can hone the skill. Because we are a generation which has grown up quite cut off from the natural world, and we really don't know how to navigate the natural world. So yes, you do need to train yourself in this subject.
Yeah. Also, the kind of databases required are only now beginning to get built. A lot of biological literature is being translated into design principles. So hopefully in the coming few years, there'll be a lot more available. Already there is much. Yes, it's true. People don't know that these databases are now beginning to become available. So we can share with you, there's one database called asknature.org, which is freely available. And an engineer or a business person or just a normal person can ask a functional question to biology. That you don't have to learn the Latin names and things. You can ask, how does nature adhere in a waterproof environment, and get a technical answer to that. So this is work in progress.
And there's another database. If you just walk out into your garden or some natural setting, just observe and ask questions. Like, how does nature sticking to something? How is nature storing water? How is nature managing water? So I think that is another skill which we say connect back to nature, and a lot of things are done purely by observation.
Thank you, ma'am. So the answer lies in nature. That's the summary. Ma'am, I have a question from my side. Like, we have been studying in a particular education system where engineering and biology and non-biology students were segregated since class 11, 12. So like that void has already been there, like seeded in our system. So how do you feel that we can, eradicate this void and bring people from two backgrounds together, like while doing engineering, or the other way around?
Well, it's not very difficult. And it is very difficult, depend on the will to. So the simple thing is introduce it right from K-12 level. And there is a slight conflict of interest, might be, but I want to just disclaim, we have been for the last 2 years trying to pitch for funding because we want to develop modules from K-12 as well as other modules where children right from the beginning are not seeing nature as outside of physics, chemistry, and biology, where they are seeing nature as part of physics, chemistry, and biology. So if right from the beginning you are taught that, okay, calculus is also happening, or a horse to tail grass is actually in logarithmic ratios, so you don't grow up, disconnected. You understand that it's your body is explained by physics, chemistry. So these are things.
I think the problem is because the way we are taught biology in at least the Indian system, it is all about nature. So it is Latin names, it is very descriptive. Whereas in biomimicry, you don't look, it's okay not to know the name of the plant, but we need to know how is it functioning. So you need to know from nature and not just about nature, and that is the big gap. So it's not, so I think if an engineer is actually taught how is a cactus managing water, he'll be far more interested because you have that kind of a mindset. Then, I tell you the Latin name of the cactus and where it grows and how big it is.
Yeah, a lot of us ran away from biology because we were taught like that.
So I think the minute we see that shift, people are very interested. I mean, when we teach school kids, they say, if biology is taught to me like this, it will be my favorite subject. So actually in our mind, there is not a big gap. It is just the way we have translated biology. We have made it very, very inaccessible to people who don't know Latin so well. I mean, it is tough.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. There's one question. Any books that we can read particularly on biomimicry, or like any colleges offering courses on biomimicry? So I think the courses part you have already discussed about National Institute of Design. So if you can mention some books, good.
No, actually, we do workshops from 3 hours to 4 months, electives in various colleges, not just NID. So we do it in architecture schools, we do it in many design schools, engineering colleges, and even schools. So our workshops are right now outside of any one institute. We do it wherever anybody's interested. And we also do open workshops, which we just open it up on our website and anybody can sign up and learn biomimicry, because we see a lot of interest even from working professionals. So that is one part of the question.
Regarding the book, I think a good book for everybody is to start with a book called Biomimicry, Technologies Inspired by Nature. The name might be a little different, by Janine Benyus.
Innovations Inspired
by Nature. It's a good starting book. And I think many books will happen. My personal view is that as against the current way of thinking where all information is contained inside a book, physics, biomimicry probably might never be like that, because it's a living subject. As you grow, and I think we should keep that spirit of seeking alive. So a lot of work needs to be done. There are many people who've done biomimetic engineering in a very specific way. My humble view is that a holistic way of learning, where books have to be written, maybe one of you will write those books, but I think we need to reconsider that either it's too intellectually focused. If you're talking about the tongue of a lizard, then it's just that. Or so those kind of books exist. But true biomimicry, I think Janine's book is a good starter. We will keep you posted, if there is some forum, as we find more material.
But just if you are very focused on certain kind of topics, like for mechanical engineers, there's a book called Cats, Paws, and Catapults, which has been written by with only mechanical engineering in mind, that how nature's mechanics work compared to this. Then there is a science writer called Philip Ball who studies shapes and forms and patterns in nature. So it depends on your interest. There are books written on biomimicry and architecture for civil engineers that might be of great interest. So, but yes, the book that is very holistic is Janine's book, Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature.
So I have a question. Like, what are the challenges in India, current challenges to adopt biomimicry compared to abroad? Because here, very few universities are working on that field.
Yeah, I think, to be very honest with you, I think most of the developed countries where the initial funding and support comes from government and grants, uh, that ecosystem in India we found is difficult. I mean, we've been 8 years. We have basically used our own resources. We've actually paid to promote the subject out of our own personal savings, which is all right. But beyond a point, certain things need, like even a seed initially has to use its own, it needs certain nutrition. So I think we need to get out of the colonized mentality that we will only become distributors of Western knowledge. We should have the courage to invest in our people and say that, okay, create your own knowledge.
I think 8 years we struggled just promoting this idea, making people aware of this idea that you can look at nature in a different way. And in 8 years, we've never had a class or a workshop where people didn't agree with us. After they found out, they did not agree that this is a good way to innovate and to innovate in a very sustainable way. So I think, firstly, I think a lot of people are not informed about this idea, and then they don't know how to practice it. So that needs a bit of training. Like somebody even in our forum here asked a question, how do I go about it? So there is where institutes need to invest in this and incorporate this as a subject. We should be taught how to look at nature while we are looking at other human innovations. But that investment is not coming probably at a rate which would be healthier.
Maybe a policy decision might be better, that it's made a foundational course in all engineering colleges, or maybe, or at least the intent needs to be expressed that maybe we are going to invest so that in 2 years you would have developed the content. So those first steps I am hoping will happen now, because we are in Shunya. This is the time to think and reset. So maybe you will amplify our voice, and maybe we'll.
And institutional structures in India are, I think, very tough to break, or to enter and say, here is a new subject. People are very skeptical. They don't know how to introduce something new in a curriculum. So that is another challenge in India.
Okay, so thank you so much, sir and ma'am, for that interactive session. We really enjoyed interacting with you. So looking forward to have you in person at IIT Madras campus sometime in future. So with this, we will like to end. And is there something like for our audience to connect with you or something?
Yeah, our email address, I don't know if you can, if we can quickly. So biomimicryindia@gmail.com, it's pretty simple, is our email address. Our website address is biomimicryindia.com. Please feel free to write to us. We had also started a Biomimicry India network kind of thing. We felt that in 2021, knowledge can be created in a collaborative way. So we have a Facebook page. We don't want to promote Facebook, but that's the only platform we have. Feel free to join that network. And interestingly, often people give a question, we don't even know the answer, and somebody from, some scientist from Israel or somebody will answer it. So these are new ways we are discovering where knowledge can be created and shared. So these are our two contact ways, biomimicryindia@gmail.com and biomimicryindia.com. We would love to hear from you.
And we would love to come to Chennai, because we have lived in Chennai for 3 years and we love coming there. So,
Yes, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Anurag, yeah.
Okay, so with this, we would like to end up this session, and we have other sessions also. So do check them on the IIT Madras RSD website. So thank you, sir and ma'am, once again for joining us on Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.